Hi everybody, it's the OC Scientist Reunic here to teach you how to use stats effectively and efficiently on improving your overall TFT gameplay. So the stat page that I really like to use is tactics.tools. It's very easy to use, comfortable, and honestly it's been one of the longest used websites for a very long time. So generally the first thing I really like to do when I first get onto the site or whenever a new patch hits is I like to go straight to the augment page. So I don't like having all this cluttered information. So the first thing I like to do is I will click into silver and I will like to just scroll to see what are the most clicked or most played augments while also having a good overall placement. Anything that has an average placement of 4.5 is average. Anything that goes below the 4.5 marker, I will start to think it is not very good or below average. Anything above it is the opposite, which is thinking the augment is good. And then if you see any stat values, so if we change the average placement and it goes around to the 4.2 or even higher or like better, like lower average placement, it means that augment is absolutely broken and should be almost a must click majority of time. The way to find out how an augment is doing really strong and what comps are being played with this augment is this arrow right over here to the right, which you can click. So if we click under stationary support, we click it, it will show up all the units that are being played with this augment and the overall average placement. So there are multiple categories here, but the only ones that we really care about are the games played and the delta. So a lot of people ask me, what is delta? So what delta refers to is, you know how I showed you the average placement of this augment is 4.19? The delta refers to how clicking this unit will affect that average placement. So if we have Lucian on our board with stationary support, the average placement will go down by 0.98, which is good. So we'll have an average placement of 3.21, which is phenomenal. So that means a lot of the time with this augment, we can see all the legendary units, which is quite common, will have a very high or have a really good average placement or a very good negative delta. So a lot of the times you kind of want to scrap out the legendary stats out of the way, because a lot of the time, if you are able to get legendary units on your board, it means you're making it to those higher levels, those level 9s and 10s. You're making it to the end game. So the stats are going to be very overinflated. So I usually avoid trusting the legendary stats when it comes to looking at augments and just look at what units are doing really well. So we can see, wow, an outlier, Annie. So it means Annie is a very dominant comp in the meta. The Annie reroll board right now is quite strong, and we can see Annie benefits a lot from stationary support. Now, when this happens, you kind of have to think about why something like this is good. We know this augment is OP, or very, very strong, but specifically why Annie? We know Annie is a spell weaver. She really likes having that front line and having that extra tankiness so she can ramp up and deal more damage. What does stationary support do? Provides frontline and an additional benefit with that support item. And especially since Annie is a reroll strategy, you're not very strong in the beginning of the game in the early stages, like stage 2. So that's why we can see Annie really benefits from it. So we can scroll down and make these analysis on our own and try to understand why these stats work. When something doesn't make sense but doing well in the stats, that's when you have to go into a deep dive and think, what is going on? Is there a special interaction that I'm not aware of? And these are the things that are really important to understand and improve your overall gameplay. And I'll explain more of this down and later into the video as we go more into the Explorer tab. And the Explorer tab is lovely. So it's a blast to use. You'll absolutely learn a lot from the Explorer. So these trends are really, really important to know. For example, another example that could be useful is healing orbs. Are people actually really using this augment in the right way? I bet you not. So let's go into healing orbs. Let's go into the arrow and let's see what units are really doing well. So like I said before, we click the delta again. And the thing with healing orbs is as we scroll down, we skip the legendaries. We can see Ari, Akali are doing really well. So these two units are really front-loaded damage. They have a ton of burst damage that allows them to destroy frontline and just wipe him out to benefit from the healing orbs value. But you think healing orb seems pretty good, like a lot of people are playing it, the average placement is 4.5. There is a trick to healing orbs. If you scroll down, you'll notice a lot of the comps that are benefiting from healing orbs are the AP comps or the melee carries, such as Ari, an AP comp, Akali, a melee carry, Kayn, a melee carry, Zed, a melee carry, and even Viego all have negative delta with healing orbs. But what if we go into the AD carries, such as the Caitlyn and the Ezreal? So we scroll down, we can see Caitlyn has a positive delta, so she's not too bad with healing orbs. It's okay. Not as good as the melee carries or the AP comps, but acceptable. But then if we go into Ezreal, we can see it's a huge positive delta. So that's kind of indicating that healing orbs is not the best augment to pick when you play these AD carry-esque units. So I believe the best way of using the augment tabs is just seeing what comps are doing really well with it and make sure that they align with each other, because sometimes they might show up with a stat that's absolutely just weird and then you need to see why it's doing well. The next tab that I really like to use is the Explorer tab. So the Explorer tab is really nice. So right now this is the Advanced Explorer. So if you are on the Patreon of Tactics.tools, you'll have access to a lot more data. So if you're a big TFT player and you really want to be more invested into the game and trying to climb to the Masters, GM, Challenger ranks, I really recommend getting the Patreon. I swear it's not an ad. I am not getting paid to recommend this. It's just I use it a lot and I think it's super beneficial. And honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I could push from that GM level to the Challenger level. But fear not, if you do not have the Advanced Explorer, I will be teaching you how to use the standard basic Explorer. So let's talk about how to use this. So essentially, in the filter, you type in a comp or a unit or even an augment that you took at the start of the game. For example, like we said for that example was healing orbs. You can click the healing orbs 2. You can choose when you pick that augment. So let's say we took it at 2-1. And then you can see, you can do the same thing, click the delta and see which units are doing really well with it. Now, what if we do an augment, a unit? So let's say Akali, true damage Akali. We're playing true damage Akali, and I usually recommend 2-star in the Akali because it gives you more accurate data, because the people who have 1-star Akali usually means they're going bot for it anyways because they couldn't hit their main carry. So we'll put this star level at 2-star. And I like to go at items. Like whenever people ask me on stream or just in general, they ask me what is best? What is the best in slot for this character? What items should I be building? This is how I decide. I go onto the Augment Explorer, I go on the unit, and I go to items. Then I click Delta. Now, obviously, we can see there's a bunch of random emblems, some gibberish to be not to be considered. What I like to do is I like to go to 1K, minimum sample size at least 1,000, and I click this little chimney looking thing and I click craftable. Sometimes you may have to drop the sample size to 100 just because there may be certain items that might be missing, and there are times when hidden small sample size doesn't always relate to being irrelevant info, but I'll explain that more later on. So we brought the sample size to 1,000 and we can see here that Warmogs, so it's indicating that a little bit of tankiness on an Akali is quite useful, so Warmogs looks good. Deathblade has a very high sample size and a really good negative delta. So straight away I know, oh, so raw AD, so Deathblade gives a ton of raw AD, is super beneficial towards Akali, the true damage Akali. We can see that GS is doing really good, and I wonder why. Akali is a frontline carry, she's meant to kill frontline, so Giant Slayer makes sense. Sterak's is a little bit of damage, gives a bunch of AD, and it gives that tankiness, so that makes a lot of sense on why Sterak's is doing really good. And the sample size is very high, so we know this item is really good. If the sample size is high and the delta is very negative, it means this item is absolutely broken on this unit, absolutely broken. So we can see that GS and Sterak's both have really high sample size and really negative deltas, which is amazing. And as we scroll down, we can see more tanky items. We can see Edge of Night at the highest sample size item here and doing really, really good. So you can see that Adaptive is probably one of the most important items on Akali. If you told me the best item slot for Akali is Edge of Night, Sterak's, Giant Slayer, I could totally believe it. Like, for sure, for sure. And as you scroll down, these are the items that you want to avoid making. See, the Gwynsu's Rageblade, the Shojin's, the Hand of Justice. So Hand of Justice is a little bit different. So Hand of Justice, whenever something has immense sample size. So this is something you have to be to consider now. So this is another variable to consider, is when something has very, very high sample size. So this is basically like doubling or tripling the second most sample size thing. A lot of the time, once this item or augment has been chose or built a lot on a unit, it will regress back to the mean, to the average. And I told you, when something is slightly positive, plus 0.05, or if it's like neutral, like 0, with an immense sample size, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's a good item because it's built so often and it's very acceptable to build. And honestly, it could be a good item. It actually may be a good item if the sample size is that large. Obviously, as I said before, Edge of Night and Sterak's has a pretty decent sample size, was a good delta, but with something with this much, you'll often see it going back to a neutral delta. So don't think like that. Is why it's very important to look at the games played along with the delta to make sure you're not getting tricked. But with something with this much, you'll often see it going back to a neutral delta. So yeah, so that is how to know how good BIS is. And if you ever wonder, let's bring the sample size to 100. We can see that Morello odd is doing really good. And does that mean it's a good item for melee carries, or like a stat that's overinflated because the sample size is really, really low? So the way we find out if this thing is a bait or not without having the Advanced Explorer is looking at all the other units that share the same traits as True Damage Akali. So True Damage Akali is a melee carry. So let's look at the stats for all the other melee carries. So let's take a look at Viego. So go Viego 2-star, and we take a look at the stats. We can see Morello doing very, very good on Viego. Sure, so if the Morello is showing well, it's good on Viego, it means that the item is actually decent on frontline carries. Let's take another look at another melee carry. Let's look at Akali. Well, the KDA Akali. We put it to 2-star. Morello, pretty high up there. So it's showing that Morello is a really strong item on these melee carries. But the inference you gotta make here is if Viego or Akali or whoever your melee carry is your sole primary carry, is your sole carry, will that character be doing really good holding Morello? It is quite unlikely. It is unlikely that Morello will be doing really well just because the stats of the item doesn't really benefit that carry. So it's indicating that Morello item is doing really, really good as a secondary carry, and that's an inference that you can make. And just to confirm this, we can go into Explorer. So we can see, just remember this value, minus 0.5 delta. If we go to the Advanced Explorer and we go into Akali, go into Delta, click Craftables, we can see Morello, minus 0.4 delta. So basically what that means is Akali, when triple itemized, and usually when you're triple itemizing someone, it's their main carry. You're playing that as your main carry. And if you go, the Morello stat went down from minus 0.5 to minus 0.4. So it means it's less good. It's still doing, my gosh, like really good. So honestly, it might mean Morello is actually a really, really good item on Akali. But it does imply that if you're going for triple itemized carry as your sole primary carry Akali, Morello's not doing as good compared to her being as a secondary carry with Morello. So that is one way of finding out how good something is, or like how good an item is for a carry. I remember someone asking me earlier, But like, oh, I didn't know how good Sterex was on all these melee carries. Are you sure this is not a trick value? So we can test that out. We go into Viego. If Viego is doing really good with Sterex, it probably indicates it's a good item for melees. Sterex, very high sample size, really good native delta. Awesome. Let's look at the other melee carries. Akali, or maybe Zed. Let's spice it up. Let's go Zed 2-star and see the stats. Is Sterex up here? Sterex, just the same. Decently, very high sample size, really good native delta. So these are the inferences you gotta make when you're seeing how good an item is for the character. So if Sterex is doing good on all melee carries, it means it's a really good item right now. If it's only doing well on Viego but doing terribly on the other units, that might be an outlier and it's type of stat that you shouldn't trust. For example, we see Archangel here. Archangel? Why is Archangel doing well? The reason why Archangel can do really well here, potentially, is for the Lux reroll comps. Because how EDM works and the interaction, I'm not going to go into it. But this is why you have to be careful of stats and trusting it. Because if you look at the sample size here played, Archangel, only very small sample size, but at super high delta, people might believe that, oh wow, let me build Archangel in my games now. Surely it's really good. And that is the trick a lot of new players get into, so be careful. But, there are times when a small sample size can still mean something really, really good. Let's refer to this Archangel Zed theory. As I mentioned, there's a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of things to go in about the trait itself. But when something has such a high negative delta, with a small sample size, it doesn't mean that it is bad. It means there's something specific that's being done to reach this conclusion. So, I believe that Archangel is being built on Zed purely because of Lux reroll and how the trait works with the stacking AP. So, let's try it. Let's go into the Advanced Explorer and let's see if my hypothesis is correct. Let's go to Lux 3. We go to the item size. We have 3-star. And then let's put in Zed 2-star. Let's go to items. And let's change it to craftables. And let's see if Archangels is still up here for Zed under the delta. Oh, we might have to even lower the sample size to even lower. Try to find this Archangel. And yes, it is still here. 46 game played. Archangel still very high negative delta. That's implying that the Archangel is actually doing really good for Zed, specifically in the Lux 3 comp. But let's say we're playing Zed as our main carry, 3-star Zed, and we're playing like 6 crowd divers, or maybe we'll go to 4 crowd divers, as that's one of his main offensive traits. Will we still see Archangel here? No, it is positive delta. See, this is the trick that you got to be careful of. And honestly, it is hard to make this inference without the Advanced Explorer. But if you can make some calculated guesses or some it's not even, you don't even have to have a 10 head or a 5 head. You can probably make that inference like Archangel is an AP item, Zed is an AD item. What is going on here? And now the next thing besides looking at items I like to do is looking at augments. Take a look at augments. Now, with the augments page, I really like to categorize them by 2-1, 3-2, and 4-2. So in general, augments, the item and economy augments are going to do really good at stage 2-1, and the combat augments are going to do a lot better at 3-2 and 4-2. And just to prove my point, at 2-1 we can see like Not Today, Idealism, all these item orgs, You Have My Sword, all these item orgs are going to do really well at 2-1. But 4-2, let's look for those item orgs. You Have My Sword, Not Today is still doing good, so that's indicating it's a really strong augment for the comp. Let's search for You Have My Sword. It's doing, it's still doing really good, honestly. It's actually doing really, really good still. So that indicates that You Have My Sword and Not Today are actually really good augments to pick up for Akali. But let's go to like prismatics. This is a really big item org. So let's say 3-2, we have the overwhelming force 3.48. We have impenetrable bulwark, all doing really, really good at this point of the game. But when you go into the later stages to stage 4, we can see those item orgs. Where is that? Impenetrable Bulwark, 3.97 compared to the 3.64. Item orgs in general are not really good to take in the later stages. So that is why I recommend avoiding picking item orgs and taking combat orgs such as like Cyber Bulk in the late game. And then the final thing I like to do with augments is I like to look at traits. So I go to traits, I sort it by delta, I make the sample size to 1,000 because this is where sample size is kind of important. And we look what is doing really good. A lot of the time I like to exclude all of the prismatic orcs like the 9 true damage and see what is doing good. So we can see 6 true damage is doing phenomenal. So maybe 6 true damage is something that's really important. Now you want to take a look, is 4 true damage here? If 4 true damage is here, it's showing the stat is not doing really good. It's not doing that good. But that value might be fake. Why is that data fake? Because a lot of the time, people who don't make it to 6 true damage aren't able to play or aren't able to find Kiana or those legendary units to get to that 6 true damage spot. And a lot of time on 4 true damage, it means you're playing weaker units like the Kennen, the Yasuo. That's why the variable is bad. So this is where you need to be considering if we add, for example, Yasuo to the stats, does 6 true damage still do well? Now we look. No, it does not. So this is the trick. This is the things you gotta do to make sure you're not getting tricked. Because to get 6 true damage in, you gotta add in Yasuo until you hit Kiana. Because if you have a chosen true damage Akali, you have all the true damage beside Kiana, you'll have 6 true damage. You see the stats are a positive delta. So usually that means it's not that good. And that's an inference. So you gotta be careful that if you don't have Kiana yet, 6 true damage won't be as good. Honestly, with this such a high sample size, with Yasuo, 6 true damage is still good. Look at that placement. Average placement, 3.64. It's still good. A positive delta with still an overall good average placement doesn't mean it's exactly bad. It just means it's not optimal. It's still fine. But let's say we add in Kiana. Let's see the stats on 6 true damage here. Wow. Would you look at that? Such a negative delta. Absolutely insane. So this is how to know if you're getting tricked by stats for specific traits and in general. So hopefully this video has been very useful for you. I mean, we're 27 minutes in. Oh my goodness, I went a lot longer than I expected. But this is everything to know about stats and how to use it effectively. Thank you for watching. I hope you can leave any feedback, anything that that can be beneficial, any positive criticism, anything that you have. Be sure to link it at the end. Anyways, thank you for watching. Be sure to watch our other videos and tune by to see more Reunic and Team Juno videos.